From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to another edition of this very show right here, Chicago Newsroom on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis with some very big news. Yesterday was a big day in City Hall because $1 million was not saved by not privatizing 311. That's the big story. Mayor Emanuel had figured out a way to save $1 million by firing those 80 people and outsourcing those jobs to Pakistan or something. And the aldermen stood up against him and they said, Mayor Emanuel, this will not stand. We will not permit you to do this to 311. And the mayor backed off. Isn't it amazing what democracy can do? Lauren Chooljian is joining us today from WBEZ, from Chicago Public Media, City Hall reporter. And boy, you really jumped into that job at a good time.
Yeah, I guess so. I thought you were going to introduce me as predictor of the death of 311.
Well, I mean, you know, all of the other stuff that happened in the budget yesterday pales by comparison because
sure.
We all were so worried about 311. I have been around a little longer than you,
yes,
and I have
many people have,
and not many people for me. But I have seen the previous mayor was a master at this, and actually I think he was a little more subtle at it because he would do things like saying, because the city is going down the tubes and we have no money, we're going to have to increase the headroom between trains on the blue line from 6 minutes to 14 minutes. But that's what we have to do because we just don't have any money. And people would go to just freak out, and then all of a sudden the money would be there and the legislation would pass. But I mean, from the moment that I heard Mayor Emanuel saying he wanted to privatize 311, I have to say, I don't think I ever really believed it.
Well, you weren't alone in that. I mean, all of them were coming up to me from the minute that got proposed, and most of them were saying, I cannot stand for that. And then the rest of them were saying, well, don't worry, you're not going to have to, because this is something that's just been tossed out there as a quote unquote, as Alderman Munoz told me, Rom's throwaways is how he put it.
Right.
And basically what they were saying is this is something that the mayor's putting out there so that when people are upset about it, he can take it back and say, you know what, I've listened to you. And it's funny because Alderman would come up to me in confidence and say, well, maybe the trash thing will be, the garbage collection fee will be a throwaway, or maybe it will be this. And it's always under the assumption of, because you know how he likes to say, I listened. And it's true though. I mean, he does pride himself on, compromising with them, especially recently, and being open to their ideas. And that was a big, big theme this budget, right? I mean, we've heard him from the get-go saying, if you have ideas, there's a box at my door, put them in there.
Suggestion box. I mean, look at how he listened to them on the schools. He wanted to close 300 schools, and he just settled for only 48. So yeah, he's good at that. Yeah,
that is, what's funny is a lot of people have also been putting in the context of, well, you saw that sweater ad, that thing will not die. I mean, it's always a topic of conversation. Well, he promised us that he needed to listen more.
Right.
And I'm telling you, aldermen will come up to you on the street or while they're waiting for a cab or whatever, and they'll say, actually, he will hold the elevator for me and let me come in and say, what do you think about the budget? Has it been going well for you? What are your issues with it? And, not saying that he was going to completely, compromise on everything, which anyone who's been following the budget, there wasn't so much compromise in it. It was pretty much as written.
Because that's the part that counts.
Right. But, a lot of people who are normally, at each other's throats with him, or they're at each other's throats, are saying, I have noticed he is a little bit more cordial.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should begin at the beginning, shouldn't we? Because as we sit here today, we're about 24 hours away from the largest tax increase in Chicago's history. So history was made yesterday in the City Council.
Oh, yes. So let's bring it down, too, because I feel like for, as I like to say, normal people outside of our world, it's a little confusing. So the $543 million goes strictly to police and fire pensions. And the mayor's big sell on that was, I'll either do this or I cut,
Mm-hmm.
police, fire, recycling, and it was posed to aldermen as an either or. And to from residents as well, that, where our hand is being forced on this one, the state has mandated this payment, the bill has come due is the big phrase around City Hall these days.
And that is essentially true, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And so, but what he was then convincing people of was that this was the only option. And then yesterday he added that nobody else had presented a different one.
Right.
And so that's one thing, that's the $543 million. And then there's the $45 million that would go towards, it could be annual also, for school or construction or modernization. That was a big point of worry for some aldermen because there aren't quite clear details on where that would go. And so some aldermen were worried that are very averse to more charter schools being built. Well, I don't want to sign off on this, and then that money goes to that. So there was a compromise made between the finance chair of the budget office that CPS has to come and report to City Council, this is what we're spending it on, this is where it's going, et cetera. So that's the property tax bit.
But the City Council will not actually vote on those individual actions, right? Because
just listen
it's
to what CPS
CPS's
has
money.
to say, right.
Because I think it's important to say that it's CPS is raising that money. I mean, it's their right to ask the taxpayers for that money.
Well, and they already signed off on this, but they needed the City Council approval.
So when I pay my share of that $43 million, that money is going to CPS, and City Council doesn't really have any say about it, other than just that they had to approve the whole concept.
Right, and then the what's coming next element of that is that we're waiting on Springfield for both the CPS budget and actually the CTA budget and the city budget. And I know that you've discussed this often on this program.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's just such a bizarre situation that we're in, that the citizens of Chicago have just coughed up 543 plus 45, whatever that is, for a total of $755 million.
Right, that was the Tribune's
taxes.
big number this week because it includes the $9.50 garbage fee, cloud tax, boot tax, you name it.
But it's important that to try to keep these in their respective buckets. This 543, as you point out, very importantly, is earmarked. It's already earmarked.
It'll be on the tax bill, as I understand it, that's exactly where it's going.
To rescue, essentially, the police and fire pensions.
Right.
And then the $45 million for the absolutely, I almost said noble purpose. That's a bad word, but for the absolutely important purpose of modernizing so many of our schools that need that money. But all of this money is contingent on something happening in Springfield, and we all know that nothing's happening in Springfield. And aren't we at a situation where CPS, like sometime around Christmas, is just going to flat out run out of money? Well,
I think one of the original deadlines they sent is by Thanksgiving that they'd have to hear from Springfield. I heard from my colleague at Aldertrack, Mike Fouché, this morning that people are telling him they might be able to make it to February. But even then, I mean, there's a lot of the school year left after that. Yeah. And basically what they're waiting on is $480 million from Springfield that the mayor has essentially said that Springfield owes to the city because there's an inequity in how teacher pensions are paid for. Now, the mayor always gives reporters a hard time when they ask him that exact question. Why are we waiting on the deadlocked Springfield when it's so obvious to everyone, including the mayor, that they're not, doing what they should be doing. They're not functioning, essentially. And the mayor's response is, I'm not going to give them a pass. Other states don't have to worry. Other big cities don't have to worry about their state capitals. Why should we have to worry about ours? But I think the argument coming from aldermen is that, I'm not making an excuse for them. This is just what's going on. And how am I supposed to work with that? And then how am I supposed to, God forbid, come back to the taxpayers and say, remember all that promise that the mayor had made that the homeowners exemption would be there. Oh yeah, Springfield didn't come through. Yes, we're coming up with a rebate, but you're going to have to pay your taxes first before you get that. And so I think that has a lot of people, like I remember Alderman Leslie Hairston this week was saying, there's no, there's no way that I could come back to these people, and might as well just deal it all in one. Even Ed Burke said that last week.
So there was a kind of a movement, wasn't there, to just do the big thing. But of course, then that would be playing into Bruce Rauner's hands, because Rauner would say, well, see, you had the money there all along.
Well, this is my favorite part about this, is that it's so interesting to watch them kind of walk this tightrope of aldermen who are saying, well, we need to come up with a plan B, but then at the same time, the mayor's office and those same aldermen are like, well, now wait a minute. We can't come up with a plan B that's solid enough that Springfield's going to be like, well, we have a lot of other things to worry about, so why are we going to worry about you?
And they have maneuvered it pretty well, because, as I understand it, both houses of the legislature have passed this legislation, have they not? Or?
Well, the homeowner, that's on
I'm talking now about the
Senate
police
Bill
and fire.
777, yes.
Yeah.
So for those who haven't caught up with all that, it's basically making the payments that we owe smaller. And those numbers were used to calculate the property tax increase. But if the governor doesn't sign that, then they're out, I think, it's like $300 million?
That's another $300 million has to be raised. But I mean, yeah, you're right. Essentially or at least I think you're right, essentially what the city has asked Springfield to do, and the legislature has passed it, is to change the contour of the ramp.
Exactly.
So that it slows down, so we don't have to put so much in this year, and so on and so forth. But Governor Rauner has just flat out said he's not going to do it.
Well, and you know who's really upset about that is people like ratings agencies like Moody's and S&P, who issued statements yesterday saying, thank you for the extra revenue, but there's this big unknown, and God forbid that doesn't happen. I mean, they don't say God forbid, they're ratings agencies, but you know what I mean. I mean, I think that's the cautious observer element of this, which is, I don't think people are trying to make excuses for Springfield. I think they're just saying, what are we supposed to do with this?
I mean, this really is the classic two guys standing up to their ankles in gasoline with matches in their hands, and who's going to strike the match, or I mean, it's so interesting to see the dynamic between Rauner and Rahm Emanuel.
Who are
They're
friends.
Allegedly very good friends.
And talk every weekend.
They must have each other's cell phone numbers. They must talk, they must talk fairly frequently. What do they say? I mean, what are they talking about when they're...
Well, we're not allowed to know, because Mayor Emanuel always says, and I think the governor's been saying this recently too, that those are private conversations, and to preserve that trust, they're not allowed to tell us what they talk about. But he does say relatively frequently that they do speak on weekends. So it's not that they're not talking. And the mayor always says that directionally, Rauner moves in the same direction that Emanuel does on these things. I'm not quite clear on the meaning of that, but that's his argument.
But they've allowed themselves to be painted into these absolutely fierce corners where there's almost no compromise. I mean, Rauner has just flat out said, I'm not moving until you give me the reform that I want, which means basically which means basically just busting unions. And I just can't imagine, now it might happen, but I can't imagine how Rahm Emanuel is able, could he
wouldn't,
move on
and he
that?
said
I mean,
no.
I don't think he could possibly move on that.
No, and he also has been holding the city up as the gold standard of, doing things well and doing them early. And look at Springfield, and looking at Washington, and basically bashing them publicly and saying, they're not doing the job. No, you're right. I don't think that Mayor Emanuel would ever.
And you would think that he has a rock solid case to make to the rating agencies that say, look, we're doing everything that we're supposed to do now, or at least as much as we possibly can. So the big hole is not our fault, but then the rating agencies, from what I've seen this morning, are just saying, that's nice, big deal. You're still not whole.
Well, it doesn't make up for the fact that Springfield hasn't said they would come through. All the the rhetoric and the funny jokes and we don't Florida doesn't have to worry about that. And that's all well and fine, but that doesn't make up for the fact that this is still a big question mark. And CTA, I mean, we heard last week that 20% of their budget needs Springfield as well. So, I mean, the argument there was that this is what they do pretty much every year. This is about what Springfield gives. They're not asking for any more. And, point taken. But again, I think a lot of people are questioning, well, if they can't get their own budget together, how do we know that Chicago's a priority?
But as you say, I mean, so what is this is a national problem with cities and states and the federal government, and we just have it writ large in Illinois. What is a city to do? What is a city to do when the state says drop dead? I mean,
it's a great question. I think
the city can't possibly come up with this amount of money that it needs for these vital services, and the state has an obligation to do these things, but you have a governor who says, hey, I'm going to cut revenue spending in half.
Well, I think taking matters into their own hands is what they would say. And the mayor, if he were sitting with us, would tell you that he's had to do that on a number of occasions. And so he's had to make up for that. On the other hand, you have aldermen like John Arena and Michelle Smith, who, as you mentioned earlier, some of these North Side aldermen, like Michelle Smith, are really worried about these longtime homeowners who are 70, 80 years old, and they live in Lincoln Park, and the property values have skyrocketed. They got their triennial assessments. They're crazy. And so now they're worried about an additional property tax hike. And so behind the scenes, which was passed yesterday, they're working on a resolution that would rebate or protect, give some sort of relief to homeowners like that. But again, there's only so much, I think, like you're saying, that they can do. I mean, the mayor will tell you that this is just what they're supposed to do.
Well, it's fascinating because if it comes to this rebate, then the city is going to have to, as I understand it, essentially set up a bureaucracy to cut a bunch of checks to people to give money back to them that they've already paid
Mayor
in
Daley
taxes.
tried this, I think it was 2010 as far as I know, and it wasn't so popular. There's a lot of paperwork involved for regular citizens to file to get that money back. Alderman Arena said a couple of his revenue ideas that were supposed to come through finance earlier this week are being held so that just in case they do need to go that route, things like, I mean, there's a horse and buggy tax and that kind of thing, those are being held in committee until they know, okay, we're going to have to go through with the rebate. If Springfield doesn't come through, here's where the money's going to come from.
So if to raise another $200 million, we're going to get it out of the horse and buggy operators.
That's what I heard.
So those rides down Michigan Avenue are going to cost $24,000 now. Yeah, right? But what is interesting to me, and well, actually all of it's interesting to me, but what's particularly interesting to me is to see what's happening at the city council. For decades, we've always talked about the rubber stamp city council, and I didn't see what happened yesterday as the classic rubber stamperism. It was something very different, a very different dynamic. And part of the reason why I was just so happy to have you on the show today is because you're of a newer generation. You're probably one of the younger people covering city council today, and you're coming in at such a great time because the city council has had a kind of a generation change of its own. Guys like me who covered city council for 2 decades, I could walk in there yesterday and not recognize a third of the council.
I'm finally older than one alderman. Can you believe it? I was so happy to see Carlos get elected because I was like, thank God.
Right, yeah, so you're the veteran. Yeah.
Yes, well.
No, but it's interesting though because you do have a mayor who, I just can't figure this guy out. I really can't. I mean, we've talked about him incessantly for 5 years and I'm still more confused about him by the day. But I think you're hitting onto something here with the blue sweater effect, that he actually has maybe learned that he's going to have to deal with all the 50 of these aldermen in different ways and come up with different side deals or whatever it is.
I think, and he also deals with us differently too, and that's probably a story for another day. But yeah, I will say that aldermen who usually go, right up against him will say, yes, he's invited me into his office, and yes, I mean, a couple aldermen stood up yesterday, mind you, aldermen who are close to him, like Danny Solis, and said, thank you for texting me and calling me and being there this whole budget process. Other aldermen who are usually mayoral allies have said to me, if I have a question, I call Alex Holt, the budget director. I mean, that's a great line of communication to have if you're trying to wade through the thousands of pages of this budget. Pat O'Connor, same thing, said, I've never seen a budget process go this way.
And he would know.
And he definitely would know. He's been around a long time. Right. I think when you look at the vote count, we did see a lot of different things yesterday. We saw
nothing predictable about that.
No, Deb Mill.
Certainly not the normal standards.
No, I mean, you talk about, rubber stamping. I mean, Alderman Mill is very close to the mayor, usually supports most of his proposals, and then yesterday, apparently she was up late kind of weighing the options the night before, and then at the end of the day just said, I can't do it. And she's one of these North Side aldermen who, property taxes are going to be on top of the fact that gentrification or, whatever else is going on in those neighborhoods is making properties more expensive.
But on the other hand, you have John Arena, who is like one of the mayor's biggest critic, and he went for it.
And he's a great example because he worked with the mayor's office, around the clock on this Uber and cab deal, as well as the rebate. He'd had meetings with the mayor's office constantly, was really working to negotiate and compromise with them. And I think for him, that was a sign of, we're not going to get everything we want here, and this is going to be the best that I can get. And I feel comfortable enough that enough tweaks were made or enough things that I said were listened to that I can vote for this. And I do think that a lot of aldermen really did buy into that Emmanuel either-or situation where it's, this bill is due, it's got to be paid for, this is the best option we've got, otherwise we're going to have to cut city services and nobody's going to stand for that.
Yeah, an amazing thing to watch this, if that's what it is, this kind of transition of Rahm Emanuel. And it's interesting to me because we've talked about, this is utterly unrelated, but we were talking last week about Barbara Byrd Bennett and how you kind of get the impression that she just kind of like came into town like this out-of-town grifter kind of thing, who just figured, oh, I'm going to Chicago, the home of Boodle. All I got to do is just say, I want 10% off the top, and I can have it. And it doesn't exactly work that way. It's, I mean, I'm not saying that you can't be crooked in Chicago, but you don't just say to the contractor, you give me 10%. It doesn't quite work. You have to be more sophisticated about it. And in a weird way, I have the same sense of Rahm Emanuel, even though he grew up here. I think he kind of came in and he saw the dailies, and he thought that's the way it works. You just put out a memo and say, vote for this, and it happens, without realizing that Daley was a master at working behind the scenes. That rubber stamperism was the result of a lot of backroom work and dealing that was going on.
Well, and can I add too, I think there was that, but there was also this layer of the mayor had been in Washington a long time. And
yes.
It's not a secret to anybody that Washington works in a different way than Chicago does.
Right.
And I think that he came in with that kind of mentality. And, you know, being chief of staff is not an easy job. I think anybody would say that. And a lot of that has to be, you know, telling people that they have terrible ideas or convincing people that they need to do what the president wants them to do.
You are so right about that, because the chief executive and the chief of staff, the COS, they're two people who are joined at the hip, but their functions are completely different.
100%.
Because it's the COS who takes you in the back room and throws you up against the wall, at least figuratively, and says, if you don't do this, you will regret this for the rest of your life.
Well, and we all know Mayor Emanuel has no problem with being angry and impatient with people, and he would say that if he were here. And I think that is why, you know, coming into this world where aldermen, whether it's a new guard or what have you, expect to be dealt with. I mean, I can't speak for all of them. I mean, some of them are very quiet and don't get engaged as much. Although we saw some of the quieter aldermen stand up yesterday, like Alderman Quinn. I mean, I haven't heard from him. Couldn't tell you the last time. But I think he came in really harsh. And then one alderman said to me privately that he realized that the mayor realized that it doesn't work well for him and it doesn't work well for aldermen either. And so to be that brash isn't going to help anybody. And so to be nicer or listen more or what have you is going to work better for everybody in the end. Now, this has only been one budget. We have a couple more left to go. And then we heard yesterday that, yes, maybe he is interested in running for a third term.
There's that too, yeah.
So, I mean, I think we can't put all of our eggs in the sweater bag or what have you. I mean,
let's not put all our eggs in his blue sweater.
You know what I'm saying? I think it's been fascinating to watch for people like myself who see him multiple times a week, you know, to see the difference of even how he is in press conferences. Last week we had a really funny experience where he came back twice after leaving, like
walking through the curtain.
Yeah, let us kind of. One television reporter, Marianne Ahern, wanted him to stick around till Joe Biden made his final say about whether he'd run for vice president or not, and he kind of played with that a little bit and asked us to check Chuck Todd's Twitter. He should know if he's running or not. I mean, it was very like a mayor we hadn't really experienced before. So I do think that he's, I don't know if letting loose is the term, but maybe trying to merge his self with his public persona a little bit more.
Well, I have to tell you, you have started your role. I mean, you've been in it for a while now, but you have started at such a fascinating time in city history, because I think that the next 5 years or so are going to be different. And of course, I will say I have never bought this Rahm Emanuel 1 or 2 terms thing that Fran Spielman and others have been trying to push on us.
Well, I think that
I've always said you fall in love with this job. You cannot not want to have this job forever.
I thought you meant me, and I was like, you're right.
No, well, you too maybe, but I'm talking about the mayor.
Oh, of course.
I mean, you know, this nonsense that he's going to do this big thing and then probably move on to something bigger. There is nothing bigger. The dailies were right about this. Being president isn't as great as being mayor of Chicago. It can be a very cool job when the economy is good.
Well, and I think that thought that Fran had is, you know, both He operated and told people he would operate, and his staff would say that he was operating like, we're running this thing like we're done. We're running this like this is our last term because we have such big problems that we've got to face them without worrying about elections.
I think you do have to do that.
I think so, and so that's one thing. But yeah, no, he said that this is the best job, and he's as difficult as it is. But I want to say one thing. I know we've been talking about how things could be new. But there were a lot of things yesterday that were just, as far as I've been told, same old, same old. And I've been around long enough, maybe not specifically just on this beat, but Alderman Ed Burke was quoting Moses yesterday. These are things that are not new. Right, I know, I have that written down in case we need to refer to it. Right. But I don't think that it's changed. There's no 180 happening here. I think you are correct that there is a trend, and I think kind of the splitting of the Progressive Caucus yesterday on the votes is very interesting.
Splitting of the Black Caucus.
Splitting of the Black Caucus. I think people like you said, Deb Mell, and who else was on our list here that we were surprised about?
Well, I mean, I thought it was interesting to see to use as a contrast, and we're really rapidly running out of time here, but the contrast between Anthony Napolitano up in the 41st Ward and Matt O'Shea in the 19th. They both represent wards that have massive amounts of retired fire and police people. That's what this is for.
And Anthony Napolitano is a firefighter. And he even said, which is my new favorite thing, that he would prefer the pressure of escaping from a burning building than dealing with the budget.
Than taking this vote.
Let that lie there. But he, I mean, as a firefighter and as, like you say, someone who represents tons of retirees, he said that hundreds of people called him and said, you know what, I know it's my pension, but Anthony, don't vote for this. I can't deal with the burden. Okay,
so then maybe what they're telling us is that it's not so important for us to fund this fire and police pension. I don't know. I do want to not let you get out of here without talking a little bit about, speaking of things being done the old-fashioned way, the Lucas Museum. Not even a public discussion about it. It just, boom, it's done.
Well, the mayor had a really kind of funny comment about it yesterday, saying that the Bears came to the table as tough negotiators who represent both their fans and the greater good of the city. But I think we've also learned, by the way that this kind of traveled through, is that they also know how to sit back and wait for their best opportunity.
The Bears.
Yeah. The Bears do, because I think we
Nicely played, Chicago Bears.
Well, exactly. Well, and I think we saw in the papers this morning that there was this kind of wait and see kind of attitude, which was, I think we could get more tailgating, more parking, more whatever out of this deal, and so we're going to sit back and wait for it.
I'm just going to wait till the last minute, and right before it comes up to the vote, we're going to say, no, we can't do this. We're not going to let this happen. I was very confused about that, because I haven't covered it as closely as I have the budget, and I saw one thing that said that the Bears have a deal, and then I was like, well, I thought we were voting on that, but that is the timing of it. And so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all these things that they've wanted all along, naming rights, video screens, building
lots of ad space, I think.
Everything.
200 new spots for tailgating.
They got it all. And the mayor got his Lucas Museum.
It's coming.
Yeah, so if you thought the Lakefront Protection Ordinance meant something, welcome to Chicago. So yes, we're going to have that, and we've got like a minute left. No, we don't even. We got a half a minute. Tell me something interesting.
My fabulous colleagues Becky Vivi and Linda Lutton found out that we had 88 high schools in 2004, and now we have 140. And in one of those high schools, there are just 13 ninth graders. I thought that was a really stark, way to use data to show the problems with under-enrollment.
And they have no money, but they just approved 2 more.
Sorry, that wasn't a fun thing to end on, Ken.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, anyway, it's a very interesting time to be covering the city and covering the budget, and there'll be many more opportunities. I hope to have you come back and talk to us about it. Lauren Chooljian is the City Hall reporter. Is that that's City Hall reporter at WBEZ, Chicago Public Media, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with yet another show here on Chicago Newsroom, and you can remember that you can see the show anytime you want, video on demand, audio on demand, podcast. We'll come to your house, do the show there, whatever it takes, and we'll see you next week with another show. Thanks very much. Bye.